All right, students, we are looking at chapter 18 now. We're going to cover present, middle, and passive indicative verbs, middle only and deponent verbs, and we'll talk about some of the contract verbs that appear in the present, middle, or passive indicative. So up to this point, you've learned present active indicative, and so now we're going to move on to present, middle, and passive. So just by way of review, in the active voice in English, and this plays out to some extent, or it plays out in Greek too, but in Greek you have the middle voice. But in English grammar, we have, when it comes to verbs, active and passive. I hit the ball is the active voice. I was hit by the ball is the passive voice. In English, we use helping verbs like by. I was hit by the ball. I was hit by the car. And so time is determined by the helping verb. So we have active and we have passive. And here's a paradigm. In the English, we have the present active in English. I am hitting, or a hit. They are hitting, they hit. And you have present passive. So you have the active and the passive voice in English. Passive would be I am being hit or I am hit. They are being hit. They are hit. Well, in Greek, and we're not going to dig too deep into this because there is sort of there's some ongoing ways of thinking about the middle voice in Greek and how it's translated, but it's not necessarily related to how you translate the words as much as it is how you translate the meaning. And so I know that we're just trying to tread water and understand paradigms, and later on next semester we'll get into some of the nuances. But when you encounter the middle voice in Greek, so in English you have active and you have passive. I hit or I was hit, right? But in Greek, you have a middle voice, and it's hard to translate it into English. And so the way that we're going to translate the middle voice is we're going to translate it most often as the active voice, because you don't have you don't have a middle voice in English, so it's difficult to translate. That's why there's so much ongoing research, not research, but ongoing sort of discussions among scholars about how we should translate the middle voice. And we'll look at it a little more in just a minute. But just know that in English, you have a active and passive. In Greek, you have an active, you have a middle, and you have passive. So here is looking at the present middle indicative. You have a stem, and the word we're going to be working with is erchomai. It's one of your vocabulary words, erchomai. And so you see the stem is erch, the connecting vowel would be the omicron, and then the primary ending. So what you're going to see this in just a minute, and I want to warn you that you have if you think about present active indicative, luo, lues, lue, you think about the present active indicative, you have a paradigm. First person, second person, third person, singular, first, second, third person, plural, right? And you have the endings, present active indicative. In the present middle and the present passive, the endings are the same. And so you are going to translate the middle as active, and you're going to translate the passive as passive. Now, we're going to get into this in just a minute. I'm just warning you that I want you to begin thinking about that. And there are two things that are going to help you know whether to translate the word that you see as either middle or passive. Context is going to tell you whether or not it should be translated as active or passive. And then the the definition of the vocabulary word is going to help you as well. This sounds like it's going to be difficult, but I think that when you start translating your sentences, you're going to see when to translate it as active and when to translate it as passive. But you can see here you have the stem, connecting vowel, and then you have the personal ending. So here is the paradigm for present middle indicative. Erkomai, erkomei, you see the iota subscript there underneath the eta. Erkatai, erkamatha, erkeste, erkantai. That is first, second, third singular, first, second, third plural. And even though if you were to travel back to the first century and you were to speak Koine Greek, erkomai would not necessarily mean I come. It has other meaning to it, and we're going to dig in just a minute and kind of talk about what that other meaning is. And you can refer to your textbook. Dr. Mounce does a really good job of sort of laying that out. Because we don't have a middle voice in English, you're just going to translate it as active. So erkomai, if you were to parse erkomai, that would be present middle indicative, first person singular from erkomai. Because erkomai is one of those words that only appears in the present middle or passive. It doesn't have a present active indicative. So when you're parsing a verb, you want to go back to the present active indicative, or the sort of the form that you learn the vocabulary word in. And so if you see erkomai in a sentence, you're going to translate it I come. If you see erkomai on a test or a quiz and I ask you to parse it, you're going to parse it as present, middle, or passive indicative, first person singular from erkomai. You're going to see another paradigm in just a minute. You're going to see luomai. And so if you see luomai in a sentence, you're going to translate it I loose. If you see, or I am being loosed, depending on the context, because we haven't gotten to passive yet. But if you see luomai, then you're going to say, okay, that is present, middle, or passive indicative, first person singular from luo, because you learned luo as a present active indicative word. You learned it in that form. The lexical form is luo. So when there is a verb that appears in the present active indicative, that is going to be, in most cases, the lexical form. There's a handful of words that don't appear in present active indicative. They only appear in present, middle, or passive. And so the farthest you can go back, if you want to say it that way, is to that present, middle, or present passive indicative. You'll be fine. Learn your vocabulary words, and you'll be fine. So this is where you are. You can look at chart 18.9. This is something that is really important to the author of the textbook, that you kind of know where you are in learning the personal endings for the verbs. So if you want to look at the chart in section 18.9, you'll see that you've now covered two. Well, you hadn't covered it yet because we haven't talked about passive. But in this chapter, you were covering the second of four master personal endings. Here's what I was talking about earlier with luomai. So luo, I loose, present active indicative, first person singular from luo, right? The lexical form is luo. So here's luo, which you learned as present active indicative, appearing in the present, middle, or passive. Luomai, lue, luetai, luamatha, lueste, luantai. So if you encounter words that have these endings, they're going to either be present, middle, and if they're present, middle, you're going to translate them as the active. And if they're passive, you're going to translate them as passive, and we're going to talk about present passive in just a minute. So here's the nuance related to um, the middle voice. So sometimes, and you're not going to do this when you translate your sentences, but when you see the middle voice when you're translating the New Testament documents, when you get to words at the middle voice, typically it's a reflexive or reciprocal. Um, he covers this starting on page 185 down at the bottom, where he kind of gives you some insight um, up until really 1814. He gives you some insight into the middle voice, but he refers to the middle voice as subject affectedness. So the essence of the middle voice is that the subject is affected by the action of the verb. So it's really nuanced, and it doesn't really impact what you are doing right now. And so I want you to know that the middle voice has some nuance when you begin translating the biblical text. But right now, you don't need to be as concerned with it. You just need to know that the middle voice means something in Greek that's kind of difficult to translate in English. So because it's difficult to translate, we don't go for it. We don't try to force it into English. We just translate it in the active voice. I hope that's as clear as mud. So here, sort of saying the same thing, active verbs focus attention on the action. Middle verbs focus attention on the subject. And it's a nuance. That's why we translate it in the active voice, because the nuance doesn't translate in English. You'll be able to recognize a middle verb a lot of times because it won't have a direct object. So you'll see the verb. Now, the endings will be a clear indicator. But one of the things that's going to help you to translate it as either middle or passive is a middle verb is intransitive, which means it doesn't have a direct object to receive the force of the verb. And again, the translation is nuanced, so just translate middle verbs as active. So there's a category of verbs that we refer to as middle only or deponent. Erchomai is one of those verbs. So erchomai is a verb that does not occur in the active. So there's no present active indicative of erchomai. It only occurs in the middle or passive. And we call these middle only or deponent verbs. And you can see here that it doesn't have an active form. So there's no ercho, right? It's just erchomai. So the lexical form of the deponent verbs is going to be with the ending omai. When you are parsing a middle only or deponent, we'll just call it a deponent verb. When you're parsing a deponent verb, you don't have to tell me it's deponent. So if you see the word erchomai, you're going to parse that word. If you're doing a parsing exercise, if you see erchomai, you're going to parse it as present, middle, or passive, indicative, first person singular from erchomai. You're not going to use the word deponent or middle only anywhere in there. You're just going to parse it. You're going to parse the lexical form as erchomai. So this slide is letting you know that there are verbs that don't occur in the active. They only occur in the middle and or passive. We call those verbs deponent verbs. And when you're parsing them, the lexical form that you're going to provide when you parse is the first person singular present, middle, or passive, which would be whatever the verb is, omai, erchomai in this case. Okay. So now let's talk about present passive. So that was present middle, which you are going to translate as active. I come. Erkamai, I come. So now we have present passive indicative. So in the passive, which we have the passive voice in English, so this should be easier to remember, the subject receives the action of the verb. And here's how it's formed, just like other verbs. You have the stem. We're going to use luo, I loose as the example. So the present tense stem will be lu plus the connecting vowel, the epsilon, and then the ending is the sigma theta epsilon. So lueste. And here is the paradigm for present passive indicative. It is exactly the same as the present middle indicative. Luomai, lue, luetai, luamatha, lueste, luantai. You can see the difference in the translation. Whereas, let me go back up. Whereas erkamai, I come, in the active, you can see in the passive, luamai, I am being loosed. So it is in the passive that there is action being taken against the subject. Lue, second person singular, you are being loosed. Luetai, third person singular, he, she, or it is being loosed. Luamatha, that is first person plural, we are being loosed. Lueste, that is second person plural, y'all are being loosed. You know how much I love that. You are being loosed. You all. And then third person plural, luantai, they being loosed. And again, you are going to translate a word as either middle or passive based on the sentence or the passage context and based on the word meaning. It's not going to be difficult because if you translate it as middle, which you're translating as active, right? So if you translate it as middle, it doesn't make any sense. And then you translate it as passive and it does make sense. Well, then stick with the one that makes the most sense, right? Hope that's clear enough for you. You have present middle that you're going to translate as active. You have present passive that you're going to translate as passive. The present middle, you're translating as active, meaning that the subject is performing the action of the verb. We're going to leave off the nuances right now of the middle voice. But if it's passive, then that means that the action is occurring against the subject. I am being loosed. So in the present passive and middle, you have contract verbs. If you remember the contract verbs from the previous chapter, you can look in section 17.5. If you remember, there's 8 rules for contract verbs. There's, I think, 6 rules that really you'll have to deal with. And the contract verbs are going to be the verbs that end in alpha, epsilon, or omicron. The stem, the root rather, ends in alpha, epsilon, or omicron. And then when it forms with the vowel of the suffix, the contraction is shifted to a different vowel or a different diphthong. And in most of the cases, you see the circumflex above the vowel. You can see in almost all the cases, except for it looks like in looking at there's only 2 on this paradigm where you don't have the circumflex. But the contract vowels, unfortunately, you just have to memorize them. So pretty easy to spot. Agapomai, really, it kind of sounds like oh my, right? So you're going to see that that's present middle or passives. If you're translating agapomai as passive, then I am being loved. Poi umai, I am being made, because poio means I make. And then pleromai, I am being filled. And so this is just a paradigm you have to memorize. And you can look in section 17.5 to remind you of the contraction rules. Here's just some hints that might help you with translation. If the lexical form is oh my, in other words, if you memorized the vocabulary word as oh my, like erkomai, then that's going to probably be middle. If there's a hupo related to the verb, or it's in the dative, it's probably passive. Just like in English, you have a helping verb, right? So that's going to be a key to being passive or not. That's why I said earlier that context is going to help you make a lot of sense out of it. And then there are additional categories. We're not going to go through it here because it's not something that you need to know, but you don't need to dedicate a ton of brain power to it. There are various categories of middle only verbs. He covers that in 18.26. And again, context is going to tell you how to translate the word. Factive doesn't work, try passive. So it's just kind of be a little trial and error. Fortunately, you get a 2-for-1 in this chapter because you're learning present middle and you're learning present passive, but they have the same endings. So the only thing you have to remember is the vocabulary words, and you have to remember that you may have to try the active first or the passive first or vice versa in order to get the translation right. Okay. Summary, we're going to skip that. There's paradigm. We talked about subject effectiveness. Again, this is one of his master verb charts that he loves to show. And after you learn this section, you'll have learned 201 words. So congratulations. All right, let's look at the vocabulary. Pull the charts up here. All right. Apokryonomai. I answer. So this is a vocabulary word that you are learning as oh my, right? So if you were to parse apokryonomai, you can see that it's in, it is being, the definition is in the active voice, right? It's got oh my, so you know it's either passive or middle. But if you remember this slide, right here, if the lexical form is oh my, it's probably middle. So the first vocabulary word that you are learning in this chapter is apokryonomai, I answer. So this would be first person singular. It would be passive. I'm sorry. It'd be present middle indicative. You put present middle or passive indicative. First person singular. Lexical form is apokryonomai. So your first vocabulary word is an example like erkomai. So apokryonomai means I answer. Oops. This happens all the time. I don't know what's happening here. All right. Day, it is necessary. It is necessary. Dunamai, I am able. I am powerful. There is a Greek, there's a word, a noun, dunamis, which means power. And you shall receive power after the Holy Spirit has come upon you, and you will be my witnesses. Dunamis. And this is horrible exegesis. This is really eisegesis is what this is. But we get the word dynamite from dunamis, which means power. And so sometimes preachers will say, power that Jesus is speaking of is like dynamite power. Well, that's not accurate because we get dynamite from dunamis, not vice versa. But that's how I remember dunamai. I am powerful because I know the word dunamis means power. Probably just confused you. Just remember dunamai means I am able or I am powerful. Erkamai. We've only said that word 50 times during this lecture. I come, I go. Nuke or nuktas means night. Kind of sounds like night. Nuktas sounds like nocturnal a little bit. See a rough breathing mark there. Hostus, hastus, or hatus, hati, whoever, whichever, whatever. Poruomai. I go, I proceed, or I live. There's another word that you're learning the lexical form in the middle, the present middle. Sunago means I gather together, I bring together, or I lead. Tapas, like topographical map, a place or a location. And then hos means as, like, that, approximately, when, or after. Look, I've told you this before. When you encounter vocabulary words like this that have multiple definitions, focus on one or two of the definitions. The only time you really need to make sure you're focusing a lot of brain energy on multiple definitions is when those definitions change based on case. Like a word appears as one definition in the genitive and another definition in the accusative or whatever, right? So those are your vocabulary words for this section. So this is not hard to understand. It's just more that you have to memorize. So focus on memorizing this paradigm. When you're translating sentences, make sure that you try the active or the passive, see which one makes sense. If you are parsing a word, if you get to erkomai, or let's say I put the word erkamatha on a quiz and say, parse this word, erkamatha, then you're going to parse it because you don't have a sentence, you don't have any context, so you don't know if it's present middle indicative or if it's present passive indicative. So if you see the word erkamatha, then you're going to say present, middle, or passive indicative. If you want to, you can don't try to spell out present, middle indicative or present, passive indicative. I am okay with you just using an acronym. So you could say PM/P I. That's present, middle / passive indicative. Same thing with present active indicative. If you put P, capital A, capital I know that's present active indicative. So if I ask you to parse erkamatha, then you're going to put PM/PI, first person plural. You can just do one P, right? Make it easy on yourself. I can tell what you're trying to say with the acronym. So make it easy on yourself. So PM/PI space 1P erkomai. So you're going to go back to because it's a deponent verb. You don't have a present active form. On the other hand, if you see luamatha, right? If you see the word luamatha, you're gonna parse it. If I say parse luamatha, you're gonna say PM/PI space 1P luo. And the reason you're going to say luo and not luomai is because luo, the stem, the word that you learned the vocabulary word that you learned has an active form. So you're always going to put that present active indicative form on a verb if you have one. If you don't, then you're going to put the form that you learned it in. All right. So that is chapter 18, present, middle, and passive and deponent verbs. Great work up to this point. Keep up with your assignments, and I'll see you soon. Stop sharing, and I'll see you next time. Go Dogs.